So how did you celebrate? Did you get together with family? Did you share a meal together, maybe exchange presents, even go to church? No, I'm not talking about what you're doing today. I'm talking about what you did on Thursday. You mean you didn't gather together with family, share a big meal, exchange presents, and go to church? Yeah, me neither. But you know, it was a big celebration. It was Ascension Day. It was Ascension Day. And the reason why we didn't do any of those things is because Ascension Day is likely the least celebrated religious festival in the church. In a couple weeks, we'll celebrate the second least celebrated, Pentecost, but I'll save that for another sermon. Yeah, Thursday was Ascension Day. And I'm going to talk about why it should be celebrated more in a moment, but at first I would like to just sort of review a little bit of that first chapter of the book of Acts. It's the story of the ascension of Jesus. The first 5 verses sort of center on a reminder to us of what Jesus had done, and then how for 40 days he kind of proved to the disciples that he did what he did. And then it came to that moment where they're likely at the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is about to ascend into heaven, and the disciples decide to ask a question. They ask this: Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Now, I'm not saying that I've turned into a wise guy. Well, I am a wise guy, but that's another type of wise guy. But normally when questions are asked now, I try to figure out what's the question behind the question. Anybody else ever do that? You're thinking, well, why are you asking me this question? And that's sort of the mode I took with the disciples as I read through this again. Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? Why are they asking this question? I came up with 2 possibilities. The first is a best construction possibility. It may be that they're asking Jesus, is heaven going to start now? We know that you defeated Satan and walked away from the tomb. Is it time for us to finally culminate all of what you've been talking about and begin eternity with you? Or is the question behind the question, Lord, are you finally going to be our king and get rid of the Romans? And notice how Jesus answers. There's something about this. Sometimes when people ask Jesus questions, he responds with a question. Have you ever done that? Yeah. And other times he answers, but you're like, didn't you hear the question? This might be one of those. This is what he says. You don't need to know. How many of you like that answer when you have a question? You ask a question of someone and they say you don't need to know. How does that sit with you? You know, sometimes that happens when you have children, right? You'll say something, well, maybe when you're older, I'll explain it. Or you don't need to know right now, or my favorite, because I said so, right? That doesn't always sit well with us, but this is how Jesus answers. But in case they get stuck in this mode of you're not answering our question, he says, but you don't need to know, but you will receive power. Well, now we're talking. He says, no, I'm not going to become your king, and no, heaven is not starting right now, but you will receive power. But it won't be political power. It won't be economic power. It will be spirit power. And the reason why you're going to receive the spirit power is because I have a task for you. And what they heard next is sort of a burden lifted off their shoulder, because when I hear that, will you do something for me? I'm like, uh-oh, what's it going to be? He says, I want you to be my witnesses. What does that mean? He's basically saying, what have you seen? What have you heard? What have you experienced by having a relationship with me? Share that with others. Speaking of seeing, it's about this time where 2 men mysteriously show up, and they want to know why the disciples are looking up into the sky. And he says, don't worry, he's coming back. Now, a couple things kind of went through. I kind of digressed as I was sitting in my office reading through this because that word heaven kind of came to my mind. And we so often mess up what heaven is, in my opinion. And so I was thinking heaven can mean three things in Scripture. It can mean sky, which incidentally is what it means here along with another. Or it could mean atmosphere or being in the presence of God. And so in this case, they're looking up into the sky, and Jesus bodily ascends to God's dimension. Whatever that is. If you want to impress your friends and confound your enemies, bring that up. So Jesus bodily ascended. Where is he? The other aspect of this that struck me was that he mentions Jesus will come again. Which got me to thinking, I'm wondering, we put so much emphasis into the Christmas story and the Easter celebration, maybe we could add three: the Ascension, the Pentecost, and he's coming back. In fact, much of the New Testament outside of the Gospels talks about the impact of the Ascension, the Pentecost, and his return. So a lot of times I'll try to come up with a theme and then look at some Bible verses, and then come up with a theme, and that's what happened. And so it was Jesus ascended, so what? And then having just said what I said, I could add to the title, Jesus ascended, so what? Jesus is coming back, now what? Jesus answers both. We get them not only in the book of Acts, but we get them in John 17, where we find Jesus praying. Longest recorded prayer of Jesus in the Bible, often known as the high priestly prayer. Jesus has an interesting prayer when he prays for himself, he prays for his disciples, and he prays for future believers. And this is how the prayer goes. He says, Lord, protect the disciples, protect them, and fill them with my joy. Now, those two things don't normally go together in my mind. When I think of protection, I think of, it's kind of scary. You know, it's tornado season. When we need protection, it's because of something scary going on, you know. And then he throws in there, fill them with my joy. We're protected by God. We have the joy of Jesus. Then he goes on to say, as a sort of a reminder to God, but more importantly to the rest of us, that, hey, I've given the disciples my word. And the word is the truth. And there'll be many people who can't stand or handle the truth. And it will cause conflict. But here's the deal, God, I don't want you to remove them from the conflict. Now, this part of the prayer we might not like too much, because we don't want to be in the midst of conflict. We don't want to be in the midst of trial or tribulation or stress or whatever it else, especially on a personal level if it involves a relationship, a job issue, health. We want it to be taken care of. Maybe we're experiencing more of a spiritual battle between ourselves, the Romans chapter 7, the things I want to do, I don't do, and that thing. Maybe we're experiencing some conflict over our relationship with Jesus, with some other people in our neighborhood, in our workplace, within our family. And Jesus says, don't pull them out. Now, as I thought about that, a couple of reactions came to my mind. Social media. I'm about a year into social media. I've been on Facebook, I've been on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm still trying to figure out how they all work. I get explained from my children periodically. And it's not bad. It's not bad. It's good. I got to see wonderful things. But a lot of information is disseminated through social media. We have at our fingertips so much more information, including what people think. Right? Now, this morning I was reading through national news and local news. I asked myself, why do I do that on Sunday morning? Not only did I read the national news, I read the local news, and I'm scratching my head going, what? And then I made the mistake, I bet some of you make the mistake, I read some of the comments. And I'm like, no! What is wrong with you people? Right? Anybody ever do that? I know some of you do. Come on now. Yeah, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with the world? Well, the instinct is to either shout him down or get mad at him, ridicule him, beat him with your words, I don't know. Or you want to pull away. You want to pull away and just get into your little enclave and just feel good. I'm not going to deal with that. We're just going to huddle together and feel good about what's going on around us. So Jesus' prayer is rather surprising and rather challenging for us, isn't it? He says, don't remove them, because that's where they're supposed to be. He says, that's where they're supposed to be. I'm ascending into heaven, and I'm sending the Spirit of God to them so that they might be my witnesses. We're supposed to be in the mission field. It means we can't get so caught up with materialism. We can't get so caught up with everything everyone else thinks is so important. We need to get caught up with the lives of other people. The message is relational. What have you experienced? What have you heard? What have you seen? How has Jesus impacted you? Share that. Don't condone behavior. Don't participate in behavior. Tough love may be required, but your instant reaction should not be to eliminate, ostracize, or get rid of. Now, as I say that, I think, well, I'm speaking to all you spiritually mature folks. And then I think about, I'm a parent of teenagers, 3 teenagers and 1 almost teenager. And they live in the real world. And they choose friends. And sometimes, some of you may remember these days, your friends might make choices that you're just not in on. So what do? Do you ditch your friends? Tough love might be required. But maybe we ought to follow the example of Jesus. What did Jesus do? What did Jesus get into trouble for? Eating with the sinners and the tax collectors. He didn't condone their behavior, but he had a purpose. He had a message. He was an example to them. And this is what he's telling his disciples. It's our task to follow his example. Instead of reacting or overreacting, maybe we could be reminded that God is protecting us. We have the joy of Jesus. He's given us His Word, and the Spirit's power propels us so that we can get into the world. Because the world needs us to get into it, to participate in the lives of other people. Jesus ascended, so what? So that we might be empowered by the Spirit. Jesus is coming back. Now what? We take advantage of the opportunities Jesus places before our very eyes so that others might know the joy of Jesus. May God encourage you as He provides such opportunities for the sake of a world dying without Christ. Amen.